Hello, and welcome to Parrot Analytics' sixth annual Global Demand Awards. Today, I am joined by Head of Character Animation at DreamWorks Animation, Bouancheau, who has worked on hit franchises such as Kung Fu Panda, Madagascar, and Puss in Boots. Ludo, I so appreciate you being here today, and I apologize to my high school French teacher because my pronunciation is awful. So if I butchered that, my mistake.
You did great. You did great.
Thank you. So, Ludo, I'm really excited to talk to you about nominee Puss in Boots: The Last Witch, one of my favorite films of the last year. But before we jump into that, you have mentioned that early on in your career, you were in India supervising commercials and TV specials. You've given master classes about acting and workflow at DreamWorks Studios, Goblin's summer school in Paris and Hong Kong, and a CTN Expo, among others. I'm curious, just to start off, have you noticed any major animation differences between regions and cultures? And especially since the theme this year is globalization, it feels like any potential differences or lessons learned would be particularly important as this industry goes worldwide.
Yeah, it's an actually interesting topic because I think animation, like movie making, animation is a medium where we make movies, and you can find the same correlation probably in live action than you do in animation, where depending on the region you're in, obviously the cultural differences and then the way people interact with each other will affect the way they will find acting choices for the characters, right? There's that common trait of all the biggest animated movies that everybody grew up with, which at least in my generation was maybe like we got the big Disneys and then the DreamWorkses. I think today, because you can access a lot more variety of movies, you're probably exposed early on to different cultural aspect of animation. I grew up with Japanese anime because France was really welcoming the Japanese animation, whether it was TV shows or movies, and Disney and DreamWorks, basically, right? But I think yeah, when you go to different region, and to me the biggest contrast, for example, India was very interesting because I went in really early in my career, and in my head I had okay, what I knew about the I would say the American vision of acting. I would say like the big schools, right?
Right.
Disney, the Disney school. Obviously my own culture, and then I traveled to Asia before, but never to India, and then you have to kind of get into that mode of understanding where they're coming from, right? And what they grew up with. And obviously India, like any other country, has access to that international animation, which is usually American animation, right? US animation. But then also their local animation, which has a very different texture, just like live action. So I think every culture has a different kind of texture to their choices, to their vision of animation. But there's still that commentary of like the principle of animation, all of that, right? Is that
Right.
there's a fascination to high quality animation that was introduced with Disney and DreamWorks in 2D, that still continue today with the biggest studios. So people still aspire to that, and there's a lot of inspiration that comes from there. Plus that little extra of like their own personal experiences, the way they interact with people in their own country, in their own culture, right? And you can see it in Japanese animation, even live action, but Japanese feature animation. The acting choices are very different than when you would see it from like a Disney or a Pixar or DreamWorks.
It somewhat
And
reminds me of humor in the sense that, yes, there are overarching structural consistencies across the board. But then, of course, like you said, each culture is going to have their unique preferences that are
yes,
tied to kind of regional society and that social milieu that develops.
exactly. Yeah, it's all about the overall like if a movie industry is more based on entertainment in general, right? Whether you do it through the even emotional movies have more entertainment than maybe other cultures. Then
Mhm.
then then I think animators will tend to incorporate that into their choices because that's part of their culture. That's part of what they respond to, right? So everything, all your personal experiences and your culture overall kind of adds up to who you are as an animator, I think.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, as mentioned, the theme this year is about creating content that appeals across borders, that traverses various cultures. How has all this international experience helped you develop animation with a universal draw? And what are those key elements that need to be there to work across the spectrum of audiences?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question. I think consciously there's probably, I don't think there's anything consciously that I'm thinking of about like how to make the animation or the choices or anything that's more global. I think it's more I think the global aspect, the thing to keep in mind is more like if the movie has an imprint or a reference that's from a culture that's not yours and you don't know it, you have to be accurate to that culture, right? Whether the movie happens in China, like the Kung Fu Panda movies, or in Puss in Boots we had a lot of Spanish inspired themes, and you need to make sure that all of that is accurate or as accurate as you can be with it, so people can also respond to that in the proper way. And I think that's where when the movie is true to itself and the movie is and people put passion and they put attention to making sure that the theme that they want to talk about is true to itself. I think you can reach different audiences throughout the world without necessarily doing anything specific for it. And I think again, it is, in my opinion, it is a discussion, right? The movie you're watching, we're talking about movies, but it's the same thing for books or music. The movie you're watching and the audience that's watching the movie, they have to be part of that conversation. And I think if people want to know more about a different culture or have movies that come from somewhere, if the movie is good and the movie has a real theme into it, usually universal themes will help, right? Like obviously if I take the example of Puss in Boots, right, the theme is basically death, which is hard to pitch, but the movie
You
actually
snuck that
delivers
into a
it.
kids movie so well too.
Yeah, exactly. But again, the movie delivers it in such a way that the message is in there, and it's a message that every culture has it to a different degree, right? I mean, different cultures will see death a different way, but I think it is reachable and it is graspable by everybody. And I think it's really opening that door to like the theme being maybe a little bit more accessible to everybody, but it's also, I think, delivering a movie that's like true to itself.
Yeah. To that point, I know storytellers across the years, and particularly in film, have said it's about selling universality through specificity and vice versa. And I think that's a wonderful way to approach it to make everyone feel connected to both the characters and the themes. And I think when we look at Puss in Boots too, I want to just ask, can you walk us through some of the early creative discussions regarding the drastically different look in The Last Wish and how that visual language developed and evolved behind the scenes? Because it is unlike anything that has come before, either in the Puss in Boots franchise or in the Shrek franchise. And it really seemed to inject this fresh, new, exciting life into the series.
Yeah, and I think you put it exactly that way. Like it's injecting that really, really fresh, like it's new blood, right? It is technically a sequel, but it's not really a sequel, at least in my opinion. I think the movie has a very different vibe and
Feels more like a
texture. We
reboot
also,
almost.
yeah, exactly. Well, it is a reboot, yeah, and it's also a sense of like you're literally catching on the same character, but so many years later, like he grew so much that you catch him at a very, very different part of his life. He's still recognizable, and I think that was part of like that challenge that you were talking about. Is we there was a strong desire of making the movie look very differently and feel very differently than the first movie. But at the same time, you also want the audience to be able to kind of drop into a theater room, look at the screen, and recognize the character, right? So the
Right.
challenge is to create something fresh and new without changing it drastically. And I mean, the
It's a
look, obviously,
tightrope.
sorry?
Sorry, it's a tightrope to walk.
Yeah, it is very tightrope to walk. And I think the process was really probably go too far. We probably went way too far originally. I mean, there was like very, very crazy explorations that I think are in the art of book, and you can see a lot of like crazy exploration of like what if the character ends up looking this way, or we end up stylizing the movie this way. And then there were a lot of different try and error, and then there was also that process of like, okay, we like the look of the movie this way. We want to do this. We want to do that. We want the characters to maybe, be more graphic, be the animation style would have to be pushed. That was my first thought when they were talking about just making the look of the movie different. I'm like, if we're making the look of the movie different, the animation has to reflect that, right? It's not like the animation has to be drastically different, but it has to evolve in such a way that it makes sense overall. Like, again, that's my idea of the complete package. The movie has to be true to itself. Like, if you do a very stylized movie and then you animate it the same way than any other movie, then maybe you were missing a little bit of an opportunity of making that that movie feel like the complete package in some ways. So there was a lot of exploration early on. I mean, obviously we introduced the step animation in the movie for that more illustrative aspect. But we also decided to kind of split the animation style in two different, part of the movie and keep the step animation only for the action, which really came from Japanese anime inspiration and really wanted to kind of push that. So that on the animation side, that was part of the process, but really overall across the board for story, look, and animation, which I think that's where the movie to me really is successful, is like across the board. There was that idea of like, let's make it something different, and also let's make it something where every element of the movie kind of correspond to each other. And the goal was really to go too far. And then when you look at it, because originally you try it on like a one scene, right? You take one character, you create one scene, one small room. I think one of the first tests we did was the doctor's office. That's the set we had, and we had Puss in Boots, and we're like, okay, let's try a look dev, right? Let's try to see how the movie could look. And then you go as far as you can, and then you raise questions like, how the character interacts with the background, if the background is that stylized, the character isn't. And then how do we scale that look to an hour and a half movie and not just a room, right? So those questions are like, it's a little bit of that creativity frustration, the kind of tug of war type of thing, because you want to go as far as you can, right? But then there's going to be a point where you're like, okay, we love this, but then how can we make it so it is scalable, and it is you can do it for the entire movie, you can do it for all the characters, and then they all feel like a unit, right? There are rules kind of to that look. So yeah, the creative process was really back and forth, and really having all the teams working together, like me working with the production designer Ned Rag, working with the directors Joel and Januel, head of story Heidi, and really define like a uniform creative decision for the movie, right?
In terms of exploration and experimentation, I don't know about anybody else, but I would love to see you guys do what Rick and Morty does and maybe have a couple spin-off short films that are done in Japanese anime style. I'm a huge Japanese anime nerd. It's a very, very in-demand genre, according to Parrot analytics data. So, maybe DreamWorks can cook something like that up.
I would love that. Sign me up. Sign me up. If they go that route, I think. And again, that was the excitement, right? That was the excitement. It's actually good to know that people are responding really well. I mean, to me, that's been the Japanese anime in general has been my spine for animation. I mean, again, I grew up loving Pixar movies and Disney movies like everybody, but Japanese anime was a big part of, like, Ghibli movies, Satoshi Kon, all the TV shows that were, the Ranmas and Dragon Ball, and all of these were like, it was every day on the TV on Saturdays, right? And I would watch that, and that's what I grew up with. So I'm responding really well even today to that. I think that's still my kind of probably my favorite genre. And yeah, it's always a little bit interesting. You talked also about the cultural aspect of it. I think the way they animate is very different than the way we animate, especially in 3D when we're trying to kind of emulate that style or have the feeling of that style. It was the interesting challenge on Puss in Boots. I think part of it to me was like very interesting, was to try to kind of finally do anime.
Yeah.
After 15 years in the industry, I'm like, they asked me to do what I love, so I'll do that. So
mission accomplished. And I won't subject our viewers to it, but you and I could definitely go down the nerdy rabbit hole of anime conversations. Yes. But I think this all kind of fits together with something you previously said about your whole career, and that every project has a different taste and flavor to it. And that was obviously very intentional for The Last Wish, which was a complete reinvention for the series. Now, the movie has become famously incredibly leggy at the box office in the sense that it opened relatively small, but it just kept making money week after week while being one of the most in-demand animated films since its release per Parrot analytics data. I'm curious what you think Hollywood as a whole might be able to learn from this success.
Yeah, it was an interesting ride for us. I think seeing the movie, like, the opening week, obviously, I don't exactly recall. I think the opening week had a little bit of competition, and I think the movie, whether it wasn't put out there early on, like, people were not necessarily informed that the movie was out or when it was out. Um, but I think it's telling to the quality of the movie. I think to me that's where it's telling is like the sometimes you hear, like, sequels do really well, or the people like this or people like that, and I think one trick card, or the trump card of this movie was to surprise people.
Yes.
I think everybody. I met a lot of people saying, "Oh, I love the movie. It was probably the best movie I watched this year." I went into it not expecting much, and I was blown away by it. Right, and I think the the bit that I want to take away, and I want studios to take away, is not that they were not expecting much. I don't think that's what people should do, right, with movies,
Of course.
but but the movie over delivered, and I think that's where the movie did really well. I mean, first, it's a really good movie. Like, again,
Absolutely.
I talked about the complete package, or at least to me, like, that's a movie that's true to itself. Like the theme, the storytelling, the visuals, what we wanted to do in animation, all the craft behind the movie is very consistent, and I think when you watch the movie, you know that the movie is what it wanted to be, right? And the movie didn't really do what people might have expected, right? It's the unexpected that I think people ended up being really hooked with, and I think that's what the industry needs a little bit too. I think there's space for everything, right? The same way in live action, you have space for big action movies that you go there with your, like, your popcorn and your soda, and then you have a good time, and then you leave, and it's great. And you have movies where you go in, they're still entertaining, right? But they give you a little bit of something that you can take away when you leave the room, or you turn off your TV if you watch it at home. And I think Puss in Boots offers that, and I think because of that, people actually ended up recommending the movie to a lot of other people, right? It's the word of mouth, and I think it's very telling, and I'm glad the movie caught up, right? I'm glad we had legs, because sometimes, especially in the market today, where movies are in the theater for not that long and they go very very quickly in streaming, which happened for Puss, but the streaming was very successful. Like, people still got to the theater even after the movie went on streaming, and I think the word of mouth was very strong because the movie was really good.
Yeah, I mean, the movie revolves around cats having nine lives, but clearly the movie had four legs at the box office as well.
True. Yeah,
I
exactly.
can't speak for everyone, of course, but I think the introduction, very visually compelling introduction of the wolf, who then we learn throughout the course of the film is kind of the physical embodiment of death in that universe. I think the depiction of anxiety and panic attacks, and I think ultimately the surrounding characters and how much they help Puss grow really provided something that I felt differentiated the film from its animated peers in the last year. And I think that's what you're talking about. Not only
Yeah.
giving something that's unexpected to audiences, but giving something that diverges from what is probably the most expected of the genre at a whole, right?
Yeah, I think so. You should have answered that question yourself, actually. It's a much better answer than the one I gave. But yeah, you're right. I think, it's revolving about, like, it's unexpected and universal themes. I think a lot of people, yeah, reacted really personally to that panic attack scene, for example, because I think the movie had the smarts of giving you entertainment, but then when it really matters, dragging you down to that really grounded feeling, right? Like, whether it is the fear of death, which probably everybody has, probably past 21 years old. I don't know, maybe when
I
you're
would
young,
hope at least. If not, I
you
mean,
know,
respect, but there's something going
yeah,
on.
exactly. But again, I mean, it's, we're opening the movie with a character that it's not that he doesn't care, but he's really mindlessly going in through life, and and his like huge ego without thinking of consequences, even to himself, right? And then suddenly the movie kind of grounds him down to human level, right? Where, hey, you're not eternal. Like there's going to be a point where that's going to catch up with you, right? Um, Very strong character as the wolf, impersonating death. Even if you don't know that is death, you can feel like the tension, right? Like that first opening sequence, which was very surprising to me that the studio allowed us to put it on screen in some ways, right? Because
That
it's
is where I personally went, holy four-letter word, this is not what
yes,
I expected. That was the kind of moment the switch flipped.
exactly. And I think that, I take away the unexpected, but I think it's unexpected with a justification to the unexpected, right? Because you need that scene for that movie to function, right? You need that drop and you need that shock to be in the same mindset than Puss in Boots at that point. So the audience can then connect with him and then go through a journey. And then Perito and the panic scene, I mean, obviously was a very, very strong scene. And it's funny because it's a scene that a lot of people remember from the movie. A lot of people actually mention.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it's actually pretty short. It's not a huge part of the movie, but it's so memorable, right? And I think to me, when I think back of movies that I still think about today, that are my favorite movies, I think about either, lines of dialogues that are so powerful that's the one you remember when you leave the movie, or moments like that where you're like, I remember this scene, I remember the colors, I remember the dialogue, I remember the sound, I remember something. And and I think, yeah, the movie offers so much, like so many strong moments like that, peppered through a very entertaining and fun movie that I think it ended up like reaching more people.
I tend to agree with you. I think film has a wonderful ability to turn small moments into the things that stick in your mind. I always think of Jaws, the theme song, 2 notes. It's the simplest theme song ever, and yet we all immediately can recognize it. We parry it in life all the time. It is something that sticks out and stands the test of time. And I think, this panic scene has connected with so many people. Like you said, it's not a major part of the film, and yet it's so relatable and so unlike what we're expected to see from children's animation, that it is the emotional anchor for audiences of all ages.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, it's credit to the story team and Joe and Daniel, but the story team coming up with ideas like Perito putting his head on Puss's belly, which is something that dogs would do, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
had friends, even coworkers, when they saw that scene, they send me pictures of like, oh, my dog does that too. And I think it's those moments where animation has that power where you can dream as much as you want, but you still need something that feels personal and
Yeah.
grounded. When we say grounded, sometimes it feels a bit too serious, but like, it is really like connecting with some bits that are so relatable that you make the character exist for people, right? Like you watch an animated movie, and it doesn't matter if it's animated or if it's a real movie, it's just a movie, right? So just a story. And then because you're so deep into it.
Yeah, so we have kind of covered this throughout this conversation, but I'm wondering if we could get a little bit more specific. You look at DreamWorks, you look at Illumination, Pixar, Disney, they are all typically represented among the top 15 or so highest grossing films every year for decades. I'm curious what you think it is about the animation medium in particular that is so consistently globally appealing and commercially successful.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting medium because it is making movie, right? I think um like live action at different facets. Like you have comedies and you have dark movies, you have horror movies. Animation does that too, to some degree. I mean, you mentioned the biggest studio. I don't think any of the major studios kind of dived into a fully adult animated movie yet, right? You would probably have to go to Japanese animation to do that.
I'm just
but
finishing up my millionth rewatch of Princess Mononoke, as of last
ex-
night, so exactly.
exactly, exactly, and but that's where I think that's where it doesn't really matter if like Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, or Illumination do end up doing a very adult type movies. other studios, other type of animation do that, and I think it's part of that global genre. I think,
Mhm.
um, but within that realm of bigger studios, I think there's still a wide range to be offering. I think DreamWorks, especially because it's probably the lineup I know the most, right? Working over there, but like every movie really has a different taste, right? You go to see How to Train Your Dragon, and you go to see Madagascar 3, you get very, very different movies, right? It's still coming from the same studio. It's still the same medium. It's still the same type of storytelling, quote unquote, but it has such a different texture. It tells such a different story.
Right.
You also have control over the visuals, right? How the character look. Like you can, I'm gonna pitch something stupid, but you can make your main character a carrot and still talk about a very deep. You can make a deep, sensible story with a carrot and maybe a tomato going on a journey, to find something. I don't know. You can really be creative. I think if you and it's a medium that really offers that, right? Like whether it is 3D, 2D, stop motion, animation in general really offers that freedom. And I think it allows people to be able to kind of dream a little bit more too. I always my personal animated movies are the ones where I forget it's animation, which is kind of odd because I go into it because they're animation, but I also love the fact that they are like so immersive and so coherent and so powerful that my mind forgets that it's animation, and I'm just watching the design, all the work that's been done for the visual and the animation, the storytelling, as if it was a real movie.
I
And
mean, there's a reason why they always seem to take inspiration from famous archetypes, like as Disney is fond of saying, Lion King is Hamlet, and it's
yeah,
so enamoring that we again, like you said, we forget that it's kind of children's animation, and we just get lost in the characters and the tale itself.
yeah, and I think that's what I love too. Like, again, going back to Puss in Boots, like we had a lot of. I mean, we had few people even early on reacting, saying, "Oh, I don't think it's for children," right? And but the thing is, like you're hinting at something that I think kids can get, right? Kids can understand stuff that are deeper. It's just a matter of like of putting it in a certain way where it's again it makes sense and it's reachable. So I think animation has that draw just because of that overall kind of universal kind of reach of you can appeal to anybody and everybody because you can change the theme and the look of your movie depending on what you want to say, right? So where live action is maybe quote unquote a little bit more limited in that regard, but
So, are there any now that you're done with the Last Wish, you've taken your well-deserved victory lap with the rest of the studio? Are there any upcoming projects that you're working on that you're particularly excited about?
well, I mean, I only worked on one project so far since the last wish. I just finished animating on Kung Fu Panda 4, which we released the trailer, I think, right before the winter break, which is very exciting. Again, we talked about having different textures. This one had again a different texture. I worked on the third one, and I had a lot of fun. And I think this one again, it has a different purpose and it has a different flavor than Puss in Boots. And I think it's as likable as the Last Wish in a different way, right? And Panda was also interesting because it's been historically for DreamWorks like more visually stylized than other movies, right? So but I'm excited to see what people think about the movie. I think it packs a lot of fun, a lot of action, a lot of cool stuff for the characters. It's kind of interesting to see how the characters kind of evolved after so many years. So yeah, I'm just excited to see it coming out. Like when you work on a movie, you're just like you just want to put it out in the world and hoping that people kind of like it. So
Understandable. I'm going to circle that one on my calendar, make sure that I'm ready and waiting eagerly for it. And then the last question will get you out of here. You have such a storied career in animation. You're obviously a huge fan of entertainment in general. If you could have dinner with one fictional character, who would it be and why? I'm leaving you with a stumper.
well, yeah, it is. It's an interesting question. The easy question would be Antonigo from Ratatouille because I would get a good dinner, right? He's a really good foodie.
That's killing two
Um,
birds with one stone right there. That was
it's killing two
clever.
birds with one stone, right? It's an interesting character. It would probably, I think if I had dinner to with a fictional character, it would probably be an animated character. I'm processing it. It's kind of hard to make a choice because I really like different type of movies and I love everything. I think it would be I don't know if I can just name a character, but it would be either with a character that's like it's in a movie that's where you don't know too much about the character, or it would be a character that I worked on.
That would
Meaning,
be cool.
for example, I was supervisor on Post Dad on Kung Fu Panda 3. The villain in Kung Fu Panda 4, Yi in Unabominable, like the girl that plays the violin. And to me, like when you work on a character and you develop their personality, you always have to kind of go a little wider than what the movie needs, so you know how they react. You can make choices, but I I keep saying like might sound a little cheesy, but the character have its own life. Like it makes its own decision to a certain point. Like when same thing when you write a character just purely for like script or anything, characters start to have their own decision. And I think it would be interesting to see to have dinner with one of those characters just to see who they really are versus what I probably projected, right? And that would probably be that. But
I think
I
that's a great
can't have like
answer.
a name. It's
No,
hard
but
to give a
still,
name.
you're the first creative to be like, I'd love to meet one of the characters I worked on to get to know them better. So I find that fascinating in and of itself. You knocked it out of the park, Ludo. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the conversation, and we're all very much looking forward to all the great stuff that DreamWorks Animation has coming up.
For sure. I mean, you're welcome, and thank you so much for having me and for all those great questions and conversation.